This is your friendly neighborhood atheist. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ask an Atheist. I'm one of your hosts, Ethan, and alongside me, hosting her first episode, is Notes from Autumn. And then our guest for the evening, Cynthia McDonald. Cynthia, how are you?
I'm well. How you guys doing?
Good. We still have to get our dinner date scheduled.
Yeah. It's all Ricky fault.
All right, well, we'll definitely blame him. How's your day going?
Oh, not too shabby. Very busy, but that has been all of my days, especially going back to work hybrid time, going back and forth between working from home, working from the clinic. It's been an experience, but it's good.
Good. For those that don't know, Cynthia McDonald had stumbled across me about a year ago because of my call to talk Ethan. And then she started commenting on some of my videos, and I was like, oh my God, I have to talk to this smart person. So I asked if I could friend her, started sending a message, and we've been, working together ever since.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds all right.
It's been a long time. It hasn't been that long. It's only been, a year and a month?
Yeah. I think that we officially virtually met like like March of 2020, like right before the pandemic did what the pandemic did.
Well, and for those that don't know, you are one of only two atheist Buddhists I know.
Oh, who's the other?
Sean Schemmel.
Oh, Sean, that's right. Sean does. And I was like, yes, that's why I really particularly care for you. Yes, Sean does practice a form of Buddhism. I think that the Buddhism that we practice are different, but a lot of the principles are the same.
Wait, so there's different Buddhist sects?
Yes. Kind of like Christianity has different denominations. Buddhism does also have different schools, different sects, different thoughts. Some Buddhist sects are a bit more theistical leading.
Okay.
And there's some that are like more like humanism, all of us live together as one, compassion, not really so central on like a god or gods theme. So, and the Buddhism that I practice is very secular. There are no gods to worship. They're not even in priests. Like, some Buddhist sects do have like, clergy and priests and things of that nature. The one that I practice does not.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my first questions for you, because I heard that you practice secular Buddhism, and I actually, in my early deconstruction phase, I was very drawn to the more secular practices within Buddhism, because I kind of needed some rituals to replace the rituals I had before that weren't too closely attached to Christianity. So I was going to ask kind of how you practice secular Buddhism, what that means to you, and maybe what you find most helpful and important from those rituals and practices.
Sure. One of the things that kind of helps me as far as the reason why I still practice Buddhism is because it does come with some type of additional way. How oftentimes religion, let's specifically Christianity, since that's a fairly common denominator with a lot of us who, come to being atheists, practice previously, does have some rituals attached to it, and also philosophical leanings as far as how you direct your life, right? Or even some tenets in how you direct your life. So, with atheism, that only answers one question. Do you believe in a God? Nah. Is it more likely a God exists? Not really. I don't think so. So with Buddhism, what it helps me specifically with is giving me some type of guidance for my life. It gives me some, and even adhering to a simple ritual like a chanting in the morning and chanting in the evening gives me
chanting.
Chanting.
Can you give me an example?
Certainly. So the chanting that I do is part of the Nichiren Buddhism, and we chant Daimoku, which and the phrase is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And Nam
Can I
Myoho.
try that? Say that one more time.
Yes, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo.
Nyam Myoho Renge Kyo.
It's just
Never
Nam.
mind, I'm butchering it.
Yeah, this is Nam. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. So Nam means dedicate or to dedicate. Myoho means mystic law. Renge, no, hold on, let me get that. Nam, to dedicate oneself to the mystic law of cause and effect. That's what it loosely means. And so basically that is kind of like it's almost like
Stoicism.
I don't even know if I can even equate it to that.
Okay.
Only because like I really don't know what that is. But but oftentimes it's more just like, you know, it's more like a mantra to, you know, kind of be aware of causality. You know, to not to be conflated with the Kalam. Cosmological argument.
Right. Different causality.
Right. We don't get into first causes and things of that nature. You know, it's just mostly like, you know, for every observable cause is an observable effect, right? Even if there are causes that are made that may not necessarily have an effect that is predictable or even like observed by you at that particular moment, because causality is not necessarily linear. You know, so, you know, making yourself aware of these particular things actually gives you more so of an idea of knowing, being more responsible or accountable for your actions specifically, and the ones that are around you. So when you are dedicating yourself to the mystic law of cause and effect through sound, it's basically saying that I am going to be more aware and more intentional in my actions and how I interact with my life and with others. So I find it more of a like of a way that kind of like makes you just a bit more aware when it comes to even how you interact with people, and makes you a little bit more on the side of humanism, if I may say that.
And from a psychology standpoint, that makes a lot of sense, because you're creating a schema for yourself when you're starting out the day saying this mantra, and you're kind of setting up your brain to look for how you can be intentional. And I feel like that's why I found yoga and mindfulness practices and aspects of Buddhism to be helpful for me as well. So that makes a lot of sense from a psychological standpoint, I would say. Because, you know, you get the benefit of kind of setting your focus.
Yeah, and that's what I would definitely say was the most beneficial portion of practicing Buddhism, is that it really helps, especially with the chanting, because it's just really a form of meditation. It really does help focus my mind. You know, it helps me kind of, you know, point or kind of like die down the noise, so that I can, you know, be more focused on, you know, making proper decisions especially when I have, you know, different things in front of me. So that's one of the things I liked about it.
Yeah. Would you say like you're developing a skill, or like, and not necessarily just with Buddhism, but like what skills do you feel like you're working on right now as a person? I guess I would ask.
That's a very good question. All of them. I'm developing all the skills that ever have been to come to being a human being.
Just working on all of it.
Everything, just all of it, all at one time. I think specifically for me, as a person that deals with depression and anxiety, one of the things that this particular mantra or chanting does is it really does help me, especially if I feel like I'm having like some type of, if I'm experiencing like a trigger from some type of stimuli outside of me that's going to cause like some type of a panic attack or something to that effect. You know, oftentimes like learning or being able to be still and just chanting the mantra Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. the drone that it creates is gives you like a calming effect. And then it helps to kind of like die down some of that particular noise that's in the background that's going to cause me to kind of freak out, you know? So I find that, you know, very helpful to me, if that makes sense. And so with the skill set, it kind of helped. There's kind of like a tool in my toolbox to kind of help for self-management when it comes to my mental health, if that makes sense. You know, one of the things that I remember when I was being treated and still being treated specifically for anxiety is that, you know, oftentimes when these panic attacks, you know, will happen, one of the things that I remember the doctor telling me specifically is to constantly remind yourself that you are okay, you know, and because like, the whole thing about anxiety is like your body or your mind goes into like, you know, fight, flight, or freeze mode, you know, primary evolutionary wiring, right? So often, like utilizing that tool to say, you're okay, nam yo horenge kyo, you are okay, nam yo horenge kyo, you know, it kind of like brings you back to yourself to say that, okay, this particular situation may seem very scary, but it's not. You're going to be fine. You've been through this before. You can get through this again, and you'll be just okay. And then you can be like, okay, I'm all right now.
Almost like telling your nervous system that there's no actual danger, right?
Yes. Nothing that's like really perceived.
Could I chant anything, or is there something specific to that word?
Well, with chanting Nam Yo Horenge Kyo, that is just like the mantra for making one aware of causality and dedicating yourself to it so that you are made more aware. It's almost like the pseudo equivalent of enlightenment, right? But people chant whatever they want to chant. You know, it's just that like that, knowing that that mantra is what it means, then I can kind of use it and make it applicable to my life. But, you know, for you, Autumn, since you're a practitioner of yoga, and I practice yoga myself, one of the things that a lot of the teachers or the senseis would do is that they may take you through a meditation practice, and part of the chanting that you would do is Om, which is supposedly the sound of the universe. Now, I don't know if that is. I have nothing to say that Om is the sound of the universe. I didn't go outside one day like, I'm going to record the universe today. However, go ahead.
Bryce Aroni asks, can the chanting be in English, or does it have to be in an original language?
So, for practicing Nichiren Buddhism, it is... the guidance is to chant in that language. So Nam being Sanskrit and Myoho Renge Kyo is really Chinese with Japanese pronunciation, because this particular Buddhism originated in Japan, I would say in the Middle Ages. So that the guidance is because it's primarily a practice out of Japan to keep things like, you know, linear or you know, sameness. They do recommend that you actually chant the mantra, which is Daimoku, and also Gongyo, which is the liturgy that we go through morning and night, in Japanese. And most of the reason for that is because since there's a lot of practitioners throughout the world, if I meet someone else who practices Nichiren Buddhism, whether they are in Brazil, whether they are in a country in Africa, or whether they are in Japan, we can practice together, and we don't necessarily have to worry about like a language barrier, because we can practice together. Because one of the other things that is helpful is that with this particular practice, it does encourage community. So with the encouragement of community, this is kind of like a way that it can kind of bond and bring us together because we're saying the same thing. Now, if you want to practice it in English, I'm not going to tell you no. Like, you're wrong. No, you can do whatever the hell you want. But but in order for it to be, something that could be practiced within the community, it is recommended to learn it in its original language.
Yeah, just to get the benefit of like collective effervescence, the benefit of feeling like you're a part of the group. That totally makes sense.
Correct.
So changing the subject a little bit here, what do you feel like is, like, how do you feel that you practice activism, or what do you advocate for?
Okay. Equity. I practice and I advocate for equity. So part of my political activism or advocacy is for those who come from chattel slavery. I do advocate for reparations on the national front and for local equity on a state and a municipal level. So I am part of a political advocacy group called, locally here in my city, called ADOS Chicago, and ADOS stands for American Descendants of Slavery. And we normally just work on aligning ourselves with different causes that we can actually achieve equity in our particular areas. And we do partner up with other advocacy groups throughout the United States to really push forth the message for reparations for those who come from chattel slavery. We already know historically slavery was a thing, right? It was a thing.
Absolutely.
And we are, and came after slavery was Jim Crow, which, was basically separate but equal, but it was never equal. And now we're dealing even with the aftermath of, the 1994 crime bill, which actually put mass incarceration on roller skates. So we're still dealing with a lot of those after effects of these particular institutions that primarily affect African Americans in the adverse way. Even when we're seeing the treatment when it comes from policing in our particular neighborhoods. So really trying to push that needle when it comes to saying that these people are citizens and they never experience the benefit of actual what citizenship means in the United States. We never really got the full benefit of the 14th Amendment. So we are really about, saying that we're taxpayers, we're voters, we contribute to the infrastructure that is the United States. We also want access to what that means to really be whole. And we never receive wholeness throughout the history that we have been a group that is in the United States, even though we're still contributing to the economy. It contribute to the culture, and we still contribute to, and we were the primary economic factor that made the United States the United States. So we're really about pushing for local equity and national reparations.
May I ask a reparation? No.
Go ahead.
You're surprised. Okay. Reparations related question. I know we've kind of touched on this privately, but we haven't publicly. How do we know how much? Because from my standpoint, how do you put a price on slavery? Right. So what do you think is ideal? Where do we go?
Yeah, that's a good question. And because you do have the argument of slavery being such an atrocity, how do you pay that off with money? Well, you can't, right? Because, the whole notion about slavery is that it was such a heinous act. I go back and forth of even using the term evil, right? But because evil can be so subjective using that word, but it still was such a disruptive institution in the lives of the people who were part of it, right? And it's still a very much so disruptive force in African Americans today. So putting a price on it as far as one and done, it's nearly impossible. But there is a such thing as the racial wealth gap. Now, I know, Ethan, you've been on and seen like shows that we did, like when we were doing the 13%, which will be coming back soon, people, by the way.
Yes.
I don't know when, but it will. we get it together.
Yeah, but we took a break and we just haven't come back. Then we worked on rebranding, which we did do.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we just haven't gotten back into the groove of
Right.
the 13% or in black and white.
Yeah, but we'll get there. It's just about finding the groove, scheduling, all that other great stuff. But one of the people that I had on my show previously was speaking with economist Dr. William Sandy Darity of Duke University, who has basically dedicated about 30 years of his academic life to the study and speaking on reparations. And Dr. Darity oftentimes talks about closing the racial wealth gap. And an example is that right now, and these are the numbers that I've heard from him recently since we've been in the midst of a pandemic, that right now Black Americans own a roughly 2, maybe less than 2% of the wealth in the United States, where white Americans own over 90% of the wealth in the United States. Yet we are about 12.5 to 13% of the population. So the wealth share is not even compensatory to our population share. So reparations would ideally be about closing that racial wealth gap so that the wealth share would be compensatory to what our population is. He talks roughly about 10 to 12 trillion dollars. Some economists say more. I've heard one economist that was on CNN maybe like some months ago say 19 trillion. Yahoo Finance came up with a number like around 17 trillion. So there's different numbers that's floating around. We just know it's in the trillions, right? Mm-hmm. We really won't know exactly what the final number would be until like maybe they pass HR 40 and they do recommendations with the commission. But that's usually the general idea, is about really closing the racial wealth gap. And reparations wouldn't just be, okay, we're just going to give you some money and call it the day. No, it's going to be a dedicated direct payments and other set-asides and protections to really focus on what would be the determinants of making this particular group of people whole.
So how would that, and tell me if this is like too logistical of a question, or like getting too much into the logistics, but like, how would the money be paid out? Like, would it be in payments or what would that look like practically?
Right. So the United States they're very much so versed on direct payments in a timely fashion, monthly to the people who they write legislation for. They have, similar reparations programs to Native Americans for different groups for atrocities there. Another group is that has been paid direct payments was the Japanese for internment during the 1940s. And then there's even the payment that the United States even participates in with Jewish Americans who were victims of the Holocaust or their family members that are still alive. And usually it's just a stipend that's paid monthly from the Federal Reserve, from the Treasury. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so it's basically, and this is not, and again, that's why I said it's not a one and done thing. Like, even if you earmark, let's just say if we met somewhere in the middle around, let's just say, okay, we're going to do a reparations bill that's like in total like $15 trillion. Now, would the United States come off of all that money at one time? Seriously doubt it. But it could be broken up over time, right? Mm-hmm. So usually some of the economists, and Dr. Darity talks about this in his book, From Here to Equality, that a proper reparations program would be maybe a 10 to 12 years of direct payments over time, so that we won't necessarily have to contribute to inflation and things of that nature that would make the economy go crazy, right? But still dedicated to really creating like a generation of an owner class rather than just underclass.
Oh my gosh, did my question leave me? I was going to mention last week, Ethan and I talked about how I'm for UBI. So this kind of makes a lot of sense to me, because it, like, when you look at how, of course, generationally, Black people in America have been affected because of systemic racism and also a history of slavery and racism, right? It makes sense that like payments or something like that would help benefit the Black community. But also, I was thinking, do you think it would be beneficial to kind of not only put reparations in money or like give reparations in money form, but also like in education, like to help people know how to spend the money? Or, you know, is money gonna solve the problems? Because I know that money doesn't always set you up for having a healthy life and success. Or is there other things besides money that would help kind of close that gap? And because you said you're looking for wholeness, right? So money doesn't equal wholeness. You want to have a healthy way of using that money. So what else would benefit Black Americans? I'm just wondering what you think.
Sure. So yeah, that's why I said money and protections, and money and set aside. So because it's not just about money, right? Now, the fact of the matter is, and I don't know where are we on in cussing, because ain't nobody told me if I can do that yet or not.
Ethan, can we cuss?
Yeah, you can cuss.
Cool. All right. Ethan, no, I will drop the F-bomb in a minute, you know, so I usually have to ask. Okay.
Well, thank you for asking.
Sure, no worries. Okay. So if this happens to happen, you know, reparations, and, you know, we say we're going to dedicate so much money per month, et cetera, for direct payments. The fact of the matter is that there are going to be some people to fuck it away. It's just a fact, right? And especially if you're dealing with a group of people within, you know, African Americans that may necessarily not have handled large sums of money previously, because that's not their life. So that's understandable. However, even if you did like a cursory search at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and see what primarily African Americans spend their money on, the majority of them spend money on housing. Next is food, next is transportation, and then next is pensions. So you actually have like overall a group of people that are fairly responsible with their money. They just don't have a lot of it, you know?
Right.
So I'm not too worried about everybody just saying, oh my goodness, what is we gonna do with all this money? We just about to go to Vegas or some shit like that, right? Now, with other things that could happen as far as like making sure that they are able to hold on to money so that they can create generational wealth, you can look into grants for business. I mean, there's a lot of African American businesses that are out there that, you know, and especially even if you look at what happened during COVID-19, that 41% of African American businesses closed, you know, during the pandemic, as opposed to about 17% of white businesses. And oftentimes that is because of the lack of capital, right? So, you know, so that's part of that too. Another portion, and I believe that Bryce mentioned this in the chat concerning education. So, you know, there's still, even though like as far as like the education class of African Americans has risen over time, especially after the removal of segregation and also practices that kept us away from being able to pay for school. Part of reparations could be, you know, to create grants, like real grants to send African Americans to, you know, the colleges of their choice, and also fund HBCUs, right? And actually, you know, make it to the point where, you know, these people can go and they don't necessarily have to be so concerned about paying a bill. and also not amassing such a huge debt when it comes, after school is over. Oftentimes people who have like assets like a house can use some of the equity in their home in order for them to send their kids to school. And also maybe even use that equity to even set them up after they graduate to get the home for their own. Like say, for instance, if they're about to get married or whatever, they say, I want to get my kids something, so them and their spouse can be good. I'm going to go ahead and take some of the, credit line of my house, and I'm going to help them with the down payment for theirs,
Mhm.
But if you have like a class of folk who are not necessarily, property owners, they don't have that. They don't have that particular thing available to them, right? So you're really talking about all the different things that can really help people to actually amass wealth. So it's not just a check, even though checks are primary, right?
Mhm.
But but it would be more things that actually would cause them to be enter into the American dynamic. So actually, the easiest thing to really do is just look at all the things that were afforded to white America throughout time that caused them to be an owner class. And a lot of it was policy. Now, roughly, there's about 40 million or so African Americans today. About 32 to 35 million of them come from chattel slavery. And if you look at this one particular bill that was enacted in 1862, which was the Homestead Act, that actually opened up the West for people to take advantage of getting free land from the government. And you have approximately 40 to 43 million white Americans that are still living off of the wealth of that one policy today. And that's more than, those who come from, chattel slavery alive now. And so if we're looking at just like that one thing that actually helped people create generational wealth, then we can really look at, okay, these are the different things that help white Americans achieve generational wealth. We can do the same thing for African Americans.
That makes so much sense. I wanted to ask you now, making this a little more personal, how do you feel like your life has been different because you are Black living in America? And it's kind of a two-part question. How did that move you to activism?
So I would say that me being Black in America and it moving me to activism was just becoming way more aware of Black positionality in the United States. So I know growing up, my mom did a little marching, so did my dad, but they really didn't talk about that a lot. I know that my mom mentioned when Dr. King died about my father just pretty much just losing it, and because they put so much hope into into the activism that he actually brought, and I would even call him one of the most greatest political minds, one of the greatest political minds that we have seen in a generation. So, but oftentimes because Dr. King and other civil rights leaders back in the late 50s and the 60s did a lot of marching. We saw policy with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Fair Housing Act of 1968, and even the Voters' Rights Act of 1965. We had this whole idea that, we won, we're good, right? We're good. But we weren't. We weren't. Mm-hmm. And then what ended up happening is that racism itself became from going overt to covert. And then we even have policies like benign neglect to say, okay, we're just going to focus on other people, but we just not really going to focus on African Americans because, they got their thing and then we about to be over here. So when I became aware of, the wealth gap, and even the generation of education gap, and then constantly seeing over and over again Black bodies dying at the hands of police, oftentimes unarmed, and then even having my own personal experiences with the police, and even like myself just like getting stopped, and all of a sudden just my anxiety just starts to flare up because I don't know if I'm going to make it home. Even though my tags may be good, my license may be good, my insurance is paid, but that doesn't necessarily mean just because I did all that, that's going to protect me from a bullet from a cop who says that he may have looked at me and said, I fear for my life, which happens to be a defense used way too often. That is the thing that really moved me to activism, to say that, you know what, America would not be America without slavery and without African Americans, you know, literally using blood, sweat, and tears to build the infrastructure of the United States. Yet we've been given a raw deal since, you know, we arrived here in the 1500s, not necessarily 1619, since the 1500s. And it's about time that we can't be silent just to think that, oh, just because we have a few of you who got a college degree that you're fine, and you're not. You know, I mean, like, I may be a bit okay compared to some of my other compatriots, but that does not stop racism from affecting me, from affecting my family, from affecting the people that surround me. And if we really have won, then a lot of these particular issues, especially when it comes to our wealth share, should have changed, but it hasn't. It's gotten actually worse. Like, home ownership alone has lessened since the 60s for African Americans. And how could that be for people that have been on this land for almost 500 years? That doesn't make sense. So it's like you have to say, look your government square in the face and say, you have broken your social contract when it comes to your first citizens. And I use those terms very purposely, you know, because we're not immigrants, and that's not to shit on immigrants, because I'm a daughter of an immigrant. But there is there's certain protections and rights that should be afforded to us because we're citizens, and we have not gotten that. So at this particular juncture, it's like, I would be remiss if I did not really stand up and make my voice heard, and also be able to activate the people around me to get the things that we should have, just so that we can live normal and peaceful lives.
Good for you.
Thank you.
I do have a couple audience questions. We only have a few minutes left, but really want to get to two of these. Bryce Aroni, would special tax breaks to African American businesses providing a local service make sense for reparations?
It could be part of it, but it can't be the whole thing. You know, as we know that tax breaks and for businesses have been something that has been passed on to help a business be able to shore up capital in order for them to be able to function. I mean, like, just think about all the tax loopholes that Amazon has been able to take advantage of, and this is a multi-billion-dollar company, you know. So so tax breaks make sense in order, you know, to help, you know, African American businesses be able to thrive, but it can't be the only thing. I mean, it can be part of it. It can definitely be a part of the recommendations, as far as, like, you know, those who own businesses that are African American and those who are aspiring to open businesses for African Americans, but it can't be the only thing, because remember, as a group, we don't have much capital to deal with, and we don't have much capital in the first place.
And then last question from Bryce, or there's one more question after this, but Cynthia, would there be a race test? Quote, how black do you have to be to get money?
Oh, excellent question. So the again, quoting Dr. Rarity, or, you know, referencing Dr. Rarity when it comes to, so who would get it, right? If, like, reparations becomes a thing and you have to determine who actually gets reparations, his criteria is for one to first state that they are Black or African American on government documents at least 12 years before a reparations legislation has been enacted, and also be able to trace their lineage, at least through one ancestor, to chattel slavery. And it's not that hard to do. I did it in an afternoon, actually, because even though like I am a daughter of an immigrant, my mother is from the Caribbean, my father is from the South. And I was able to trace my lineage through my father back to chattel slavery in Virginia, just using the census. So the 1870 census was one of the first census that was enacted after slavery was abolished in 1865. So with that, oftentimes when you see occupation like maid, servant, farmer, things of that nature that's on the census from that particular time period, more than likely that is a person that comes from chattel slavery. And if they actually have like root like in a southern state, which most of us do, because like the Great Migration really didn't happen until the early 1900s, then, you know, being able to correlate that lineage through slavery is like, you know, the easiest, is easy. It's not that hard.
All right. And then last question. Would you oppose something like assistance for lower class rather than assistance for solely Black Americans? Or would that not be the same kind of reparations?
Yes, that is an excellent question. So reparations and assistance for lower class people are two different things. I don't oppose either. I believe that the government should help people who are poor and disenfranchised. I mean, I work with a lot of poor people as being a social worker. A lot of people I work with are homeless, and I work with all creeds and colors and ethnicities. But reparations is a debt. It is a debt for the years of disenfranchisement of African Americans that specifically come from chattel slavery that has been wrought by municipalities, states, and the federal government. So, you know, that, so like with, like, say for instance, like Autumn, you bringing up UBI for those who have like a certain income level, that's fine. But that would not be the same as reparations. That would be a universal basic income for those who may be at, let's say, let's say like 200 or 300% over the federal poverty line, right? They'll get, you know, you get an extra $1,000 a month, something like that. Mm-hmm. But those who actually come from chattel slavery and has like experienced the harm from, you know, practices that have been wrought and sanctioned by the United States, completely separate.
Awesome. Well, we got to jump out of here, but Autumn, did you have any last questions?
No, I was going to say I'm on board with helping everyone. I'm with you. I'm like, we could solve all the, well, not all the problems, but like ideally, yeah. But, you know, it's like, and I agreed, it makes sense that it's a separate issue. So you would pay it out a separate way, not just a blanket Bandaid, right? So I'm with you. I hope that I wish you luck with your activism. I hope that it goes well. And I also, you know, I hope that we make progress in that area as America.
Thank you. I do want to just throw in one thing that, you know, one of the wins that we actually achieved here in Illinois is that our group was able to participate in the latest legislation in Illinois for healthcare reform. So we were able to add the language to make violence as a public health crisis. So that is going to really look at structural violence. Also, how racism can even show up in structures in that particular instance, so that you can actually really dedicate resources to communities that have experienced struggle, that have struggled and experienced structural violence throughout their time period. So we were able to do that. We had a whole, you know, restream party about it and everything. And our next thing now is to actually write a program.
Great.
Well, Cynthia, where can everyone check you out at?
My link tree. My link tree got out. It was in the description below. And I am also conducting this week's episode of the Nonprofits. If you all go to the Nonprofits channel, you'll actually see my promo. And my awesome. Yeah, I'm actually singing a little bizet for the promo. So y'all check that out.
Oh, nice.
Isn't working with the ACA fun?
I love working with the ACA. The ACA is great, and I am a proud card-holding member of the ACA as well. So, because I'm all about that separation of church and state life as well, and also separating African Americans from religion. But that's your next dream.
Mm-hmm. We should talk about that.
Notes from Autumn will be taking over hosting next week. I should have had on my calendar who it is. Hang on 1 second. Crap.
If I was really good at my new job, I would already know as well. So
Helen Green, you will be interviewing Helen Green next week. Cynthia, thank you. Autumn, thank you. Everyone have a good evening and join us on the pickup line in 12 minutes where we talk trauma and relationships. Good night.